WNBA superstar and Phoenix center Brittney Griner was detained at the Moscow airport in the weeks before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. She remains in custody, was recently visited by State Department officials who said that she is in good condition. Further details of her legal status of her detainment, and what it might take to get her out remain opaque. To help us kind of unpack all the details and concerns around Miss Griner's detention is an expert in Russian law, professor of law at the University of Illinois, Professor Peter Maggs. Professor Maggs, thank you for joining Takeline.
Thank you.
So you've written a number of books about Russian law, and you are an expert in Russian law. First of all, I guess the one thing I've been interested in is, like, how does one become an expert in Russian law? My understanding of Russia is that the standards of rule of law are much different than we are used to here in the West.
There are different ways to do it. The way I did it goes back to my freshman year in college. And I needed to choose a foreign language, and I decided Chinese was too hard and Spanish was too easy. So I sort of flipped a coin and picked Russian. And very few people studied Russian then, so the instruction was really good, like a native speaker with 2 students. It was almost like private tutoring, so I actually learned some. Then when I went to law school, there was on the law faculty one of the leading American experts on Russian law. So I studied with him, and he encouraged me to go on. And when I got out of law school, they were just starting up an exchange of graduate students between the United States and the Soviet Union. And I got selected as one of the American participants in this exchange. And instead of having to go to work, I got a full scholarship from the US and Russian governments. So I spent a year there and was lucky again to study with a top expert in Soviet law there. And then after that, I've been teaching it for many years, writing on it and keeping up with it, going to Russia regularly until COVID, when I sort of shut down on international travel. And more recently, as you know, the State Department has strongly recommended against Americans going to Russia and saying you can get in, but we're not guaranteeing you can get out. So
yeah. So what are some of the hurdles that Ms. Griner is going to have to clear in order to get this resolved?
Everything involving Americans in Russia during the Ukraine war has a political aspect.
Right.
So this is not like a traffic ticket. I've gotten stopped a couple of times by traffic cops in Russia, talked about of a ticket, fast talking. And that was in times when things were good and you're treated normally. I've also been in the taxi when the taxi driver got a ticket and had to pay the fine or whatever. But this is much more serious. I've also followed various criminal cases, and you can divide them into ordinary crimes and things where there's political influence. And anything involving an American these days involves political influence. And thus, you need to look at the whole political context, but even where there's political influence, they're going to go through the formal steps required by the Criminal Code and Criminal Procedure Code, which is what they have been doing. Everything formally has been by the book, so to speak.
Do they have court? Like, in my mind, Russia is just run based on dashboard cam footage.
Well, yes, they have courts. And there are a lot of ordinary cases, ordinary disputes. Somebody bought something, he says it's no good, he wants his money back. There's a child custody fight when a couple gets divorced. And many of those ordinary cases are decided in a pretty ordinary way by ordinary judges. Probably not decided as well as in the United States or England, because in the United States and England, being a judge is a very high prestige job. And in Russia, it's a very low prestige job. So it does not, and low pay. So it doesn't attract such good people as you get in the United States.
Oh yeah, your judge has a different attitude when the paper isn't right, for sure.
Judge is sort of viewed as a bureaucrat in the overall bureaucratic system, in which if you don't hear from the people above you, you just do your job. If you do hear from people above you, when they say to jump, you jump.
What is your sense of, so Ms. Griner has been detained because the charges relate to her possession of, a controlled substance, essentially. Yeah. What is your sense? It has been suggested, I've not seen this reported as fact anywhere, but it has been suggested that these charges are, trumped up to some degree, certainly politically motivated. What is your sense of why these charges happened in the time that they happened? And you mentioned the political angle. At the point that a trial becomes political in Russia, does that mean that basically there can be no resolution until the top political figures in the country decide that there should be a resolution?
I think that's true. But going back to what you said first, various things can happen. And you can take two different scenarios. One scenario is some drugs are planted. And a number of opponents of the government have claimed that when they were arrested for drug offenses, that they had no idea that somebody had planted the drugs there. The police would arrive with a search warrant, they'd start searching, and then they'd pull out some drugs. And these are real drugs, because in their evidence room, they have locked up real drugs from real drug offenders. So it was the real stuff. And it really was there, but the question was who put it there?
Right.
That's one type of drug offense. The other type of drug offense is you're a drug user, a drug dealer, and somehow the authorities come across what you're doing and what you possess, and you're in trouble. And that may just be ordinary trouble, may not have political consequences, but a big time drug dealer may get into quite serious trouble. And a small time user may still get into trouble for what you could go down to your corner shop here and buy legally in many states in the United States. So it's very hard to know in general whether something is planted or something is real. If it's planted, it's obviously political.
But you don't discount the possibility that something was potentially planted on Ms. Griner. That is something that could have happened.
It could have happened, and I think it has happened. And just a few days ago, the most outspoken opponent of the regime, Navalny, was convicted on completely fake charges. So we know,
I think given another 9 or 13 years or something. Yeah.
So we know a political conviction on fake charges can happen because it happened a couple of days ago. On the other hand, thousands of people are convicted every day in Russia on perfectly real charges, often with fairly severe penalties, but real charges. And occasionally, but it's a small percent, if they have a great lawyer and good luck, they can get off if it turns out they're not charged. For instance, if you're charged under a controlled substance, there has to be a lab test to prove what it is. You can attack the accuracy of the lab test if you're a good lawyer. Another thing, the length of the minimum and maximum sentence depends on the quantity of the drugs and whether you were involved with a group of people doing bad drug stuff. And again, a good lawyer can try to get this pushed into a category such as a smaller quantity, or possession and not dealing, or possession and not smuggling. Typically, lawyers rarely get somebody acquitted, but they do often get it moved into a somewhat lesser category, or have some argument as to why the minimum rather than maximum sentence should be imposed.
Takeline is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy, the best and easiest way to play fantasy sports. Through Underdog's slick mobile app and easy-to-use website, you can draft your favorite NBA players in minutes. Just head to UnderdogFantasy.com, or the better version, download their beautiful app. Their slick and wonderful and easy-to-use mobile app at the App Store or the Google Play Store, and Underdog will double your first deposit up to $100 with the promo code Takeline. That's right. Any amount of money you put in, above $10 and up to $100, they will match. So what are you waiting for? Sign up with the code Takeline, get your deposit match, and draft your NBA team today.
Does celebrity play a role in like Russian court decisions?
Celebrity does play a role. In particular, if you're famous for being an opponent of the regime, it's going to play a real political role. On the other hand, if you're part of their scheme to dope their Olympic contestants, your celebrity may protect you if you're following instructions to take some enhancing substance.
Yeah, because that's what I'm wondering. Because I mean, she's like a Russian celebrity. She's been playing ball in Russia for a few years. I'm wondering if that'll get her some juice. Shout out to OJ. I'm not going to elaborate.
I don't know which way that will go. On the one hand, she's not a sort of undesirable character. She's sort of a role model as somebody who's worked very hard and gotten where she has in sports. On the other hand, if you take a hostage, the more valuable the person, the more valuable the hostage you've got.
Yeah.
And they have picked up a couple of ex-Marines with dubious charges that they were drunk and disorderly and hit a cop. But a somewhat aggressive ex-Marine is not a sort of valuable hostage to hold, as opposed to a star.
The conditions that political prisoners in Russia through the Soviet years and into the Russian Federation years is, I think, varied. But do you have any kind of sense what a prisoner of the kind of visibility of Brittney Griner would be held in? What kind of state should be held in?
There are two stages. One is the stage before you're tried, pretrial detention, in which you're in some sort of pretrial detention holding facility. And then in the normal course of things, you're going to be convicted. And if it's a long term, you'll be sent to a labor camp. And there are different levels of labor camp depending on how serious the crime, uncomfortable, more uncomfortable, and most uncomfortable. It appears from what the State Department said that she's been held in fairly comfortable conditions so far. I think at this point, there's someone deciding what to do, and so they're going to hold her for a while, at least in fairly nice conditions.
Do you think these conditions involve a basketball court? I'm saying that completely seriously. Do you think they're making her play basketball right now?
I don't think so. But years ago, I was on the grand jury here in my hometown. And under the local law, the grand jury has to go and inspect the county jail. We inspected it and had a very nice basketball court. But usually you don't have luxuries like that, particularly in the holding jails. The holding jails are, for the average Russian, often worse than what you might get if you're sent to serve your sentence in a labor camp.
I think, here in the West, we're brought up just surrounded and immersed in this, the U.S. law system, details of which bombard us from TV shows, from movies, and through that we get this understanding of this kind of tradition that stretches back to like English common law, etc., the Magna Carta. What is the tradition of Russian law? Like, what is the kind of, if you could just like sketch it out for us from Where does it come from, and what are the if there are any kind of like core philosophies behind it? Obviously in the English common law tradition, property rights, etc. Those things are all very important. What are the important things for the Russian system?
There is a much shorter tradition in Russia, and the present legal system was formed in the latter part of the 19th century and largely followed the German model of having very specific written codes, having courts with the German model of those days. Everything works much better in Germany now. They have really great courts and so forth, and totally fair. But the difference was in Russia, except for brief periods when things were quite fair in the legal system, there were long periods when things were very unfair and orders were taken from the top. There were some brief periods in the 19th century, then brief period after communism fell where things were run pretty fairly. And the much longer periods of the Tsars and Stalin and Putin have been ones where the courts have been quite subservient.
Okay, so Brittney Griner, I think we can all agree her detention is like politically motivated. They see her as possibly an asset.
Well, there are two possibilities there. Either the whole thing is made up and it's totally politically motivated, or they caught her with something and then it inevitably became political given the current state of U.S.-Russian relations.
And I don't know a lot, but I did watch Madam Secretary 2 times through. What are the odds that they plan to use her as like a bargaining chip? Are they going to try to like trade her for like Russian operatives that we have? Is there discussions when the State Department came and checked on her?
Certainly done that in the past. Many years ago, I was involved in a case where the U.S. got 2 Russian spies. And the Russians then arrested an American businessman in Moscow. Were cooperating with the State Department, the guy's business, which made the spare parts for the natural gas lines that distributed gas throughout Russia, stopped fixing them when they broke. So there were all sorts of things. And the US authorities said, this guy's just an ordinary businessman you made a case against. We're not going to give up 2 spies because you made up a fake case. They said, we want to get your top 2 or 3 dissidents in exchange for the 2 spies, which they did. So there was bargaining on both sides and some heavy pressure from the US.
How do you see this resolving itself?
I think it is tied to the whole resolution of the Ukraine situation. And nobody knows how that's going to get resolved.
Yeah.
If the U.S. said, okay, we'll stop sending arms to Ukraine, Putin, you can have it. But by the way, we'd like you to release a few Americans. He'd say, fine, they'll be flying out first class on the next plane.
But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen.
But that's not going to happen.
Right.
On the other hand, as long as the situation is unresolved, you want to keep all your bargaining chips. As you know, Russians are great chess players. And one pawn will decide the game between grandmasters.
Well, he is Peter Maggs, professor of Russian law at the University of Illinois. Professor Maggs, thank you so much for sharing your unique insight on this very serious subject.
Thank you very much for having me.